Hello everyone, welcome to the 92nd episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this video, I'd like to re-explore the concept of entropy. Now, entropy is understood in science as this force that disaggregates things, turns order into chaos, but more specifically, it's more like a sort of an energy equalization. But I'd like to re-explore it from the perspective of a concept, certain concepts that I've developed in previous videos. So if you haven't watched like the last 10 or so videos, I really encourage you to watch them because in there I've explored the concept of networks for the different layers of reality or holon structures. So what are these? It's basically what I mean is that if you have like a imagine that the universe sort of splits into bundles of energy. This is just pure energy. What can you do with it? Imagine that this is almost like some kind of Play-Doh clay. How do you mold it into something? Like, for instance, the objects that we see. And ultimately, the way that you do it is via networks that rearrange this energy into and give it a certain form. And these networks are stacked up one on top of the other. And so the way that it's sort of structured is that you have a network representing, physics, and that gives that energy a certain shape or form, and that again creates bundles within bundles, where you have aggregates of atoms, for instance, that aggregate together, and then you have like chemistry, a network of chemistry, which is linked in a certain way with on top of physics, and that again creates bundles within bundles, where molecules sort of where atoms arrange in molecules, and then you have the network of biology, and that has a certain interaction with chemistry. And then finally, there is the network of humanity, which what it does to all the other levels is it adds ideas or manifested thoughts on top of all of the other networks. So ultimately, what you could view reality as, let's take our planet as an example. Our planet is more like an onion, where basically at the center is like a universal consciousness which is contemplated from plenty of different directions. Um, and it has a certain energy potential. And then that energy is given certain forms. So you have one version of the planet which is just made up of atoms, you could say. And then new consciousnesses sort of add on top of that are observing the atom aspect of the planet and transform it into chemistry. Now you have a planet with oceans, seas, rocks, and then again, new observers and consciousnesses are added and observe that energy. And they run through, of course, all of the layers. So they run through atoms, chemistry, and they add yet another layer on top of that, and that is biology. And then yet another layer of the planet is ideas. And all of these layers sort of interact with each other. So right now you're watching this video on a tablet, probably sitting on a chair. What you have to realize is that you're sitting on a physical idea. You're sitting in on a thought form, and you're contemplating this video via also a thought form. That is the thought, the idea of the tablet made manifest through all those layers, all the way to the world of ideas where you look at that tablet. So ultimately, you could see that basically consciousness is at the root of everything because it acts almost like a sort of an electromagnet, which shapes the energy that is representing our planet and molds it into plenty of different layers of reality of this planet, which are stacked one on top of the other. So you, for instance, your physical self, for instance, is a mold of atoms, a mold of chemicals, a mold of cells, which then manifests as your body separate from, well, seemingly separate from your reality. But ultimately, the atoms that compose your body are no different than the atoms that are in the room that you are walking around. And maybe one thought that you should maybe realize is that when you're moving around, it's not your atoms that are moving. It's almost like if you were in a liquid and it's your consciousness that is moving inside that liquid, and it gives you the impression that your atoms are moving alongside you, but maybe you're actually just moving in a sea of energy, and your atoms are recreated every single split second in the next spot that you materialize yourself as. So your atoms are not following you around. The information contained in your atoms, which is sort of this memory that is embedded in the consciousness that is observing pure energy from a certain vantage point, then molds your body, the energy into your body, and it gives you the impression that your atoms are moving with you when actually they're recreated every single instant from that energy via your consciousness. And again, like there's just so many different consciousnesses observing that energy, and there's the interaction between these different layers. So, what I'm trying to get to, because the topic of this video was entropy, is that another way of viewing entropy is to view the force that these networks exert one on the other. So when a certain network becomes a bit less powerful, like for instance, if humanity now loses 6 billion people where only 1 billion, it will manifest in the form as buildings crumbling, as chairs and all that becoming, turning back to dust and stuff, being eaten by worms. But that is the form that it takes when actually what happens is simply the strength of the human network is now lower, and so the network of biology, chemistry, and physics sort of takes over and pulls reality and has more power in shaping reality into and molding this energy into a world where our ideas no longer take physical form. And so entropy is not really like it's not a single force. It's actually several forces stacked on top of each other that are pulling things one towards the other. So biology has its own force of entropy on the layer that is above, and syntropy on the layer that is below. So it's trying to organize chemistry into life. And the same for chemistry. Chemistry is trying to pull biology back to chemistry. And you have these interactions here. And so the power of the network determines the reality or the form that you see. But it's the networks that identifying the networks is really key, because there isn't just one entropy. There are entropies that are the sum total of the different power of the networks that are within your reality. And the interplay between those networks then gives you a single formula, but maybe it's more complex than that. Maybe it's interesting to sort of decompose it into the different networks. And also, one of the reasons why it's interesting to model that in that regard is that once humanity reaches a global, the state of a global consciousness, like a being that is conscious of itself, that has its own consciousness on top of the individual consciousnesses of humans, like for instance our bodies are made up of living cells, the power of syntropy, of the idea of our body on living cells, is extremely powerful. That is, if you take 10,000 billion of our cells, transform them into unicellular organisms, and then just throw them into the ocean, um, they will disaggregate. Some of them will die very quickly, some of them will live on, but I mean, it will be much more chaotic than this higher organizing principle, which is your body. And so, what I mean by this is that it will cement the network of humanity and give it much, much more power in this layer, and it will actually allows us to create this new layer on top of it, which is ideas. But I mean, ideas, we're not there yet. I mean, we're towards the world of ideas. We're kind of in between. There's like a gray zone. It's like a continuum here. Of course, um, it's not just one or the other, but there's a continuum. Obviously, you have more and more complex chemical reactions until you reach a threshold, and then you're in biology. And then you have more and more complex organisms in biology until they reach the level of the human, and then you're in the world of ideas. But that means that basically our ideas will manifest much faster, and also will have a lifespan that is much more sort of durable than what we see now, where if you leave your room unattended for like a month, and you find like dust everywhere, and maybe like if there's a leak, or if you leave water on the ground, it creates mold and stuff. It's just basically this form of the fact that if you stop observing reality as a human, it sort of decomposes. The ideas sort of fade away, um, because you're not proactively um, observing that energy and molding it into a chair, a tablet. And of course, right now, because our power over reality is still um, low, given we have not reached the level of global consciousness, then the way we have to create syntropy in our reality is constantly maintaining things with a physical action. That is, you actually have to take a vacuum cleaner and vacuum your house. You actually have to make things and repair things. Whereas once you lock into a global consciousness, then the form that the experience will take is almost like um, um, doing things with your mind alone, like with your thoughts. You can start controlling reality with your thoughts without having to go through the physical action. And the physical action will actually be something more like, that scene in Back to the Future 3, when Doc walks into a bar in the Wild Wild West, and he's drunk, and he's like talking about the future to these cowboys and saying, "In the future, people will have cars. They will actually be running for pleasure, because it's entertaining." And like everybody was making fun of him, like, "Yeah, sure, people are gonna be running just for fun. Like that's gonna ever happen." We're actually using your physical hands to create things in 3 or 400 years will actually be something of like a really enjoyable experience by then, because it will be so easy to manifest things with your thoughts that doing it manually will have a certain charm to it. Now, today we can't imagine that ever, because we're all tired of doing the dishes and all that stuff. But for the humans in then, they will actually be enjoying the time that they can the extra time they can sort of create artificially to manifest an idea, just like really appreciate all the physical process. Now, I'll give you an idea of one possible form this evolution towards achieving a global organism and the power that we have over controlling reality and manifesting things with our thoughts, the kind of progress that we are going to, how it will actually manifest, how it will materialize. Now, I had a revelation like about 3 years ago. I was in a very crazy state where I had my spiritual awakening, but I hadn't really any control over what I was getting as information. And here is just one possible way that this might manifest. Now, granted, this is not right now, but I mean, it's an experiment that you can try at home. Um, Augmented reality. Now, augmented reality is a way of putting on a set of goggles on top of your eyes and superposing a virtual object like an apple and make it appear on a table and making it look like it's actually sitting there because it superposes a virtual object on top of reality. Now, that is the very first kind of, let's say, the premises of materializing things with your thoughts. Because ultimately, that virtual apple is a thought form that has been encoded into a virtual image, and then it's virtually superimposed onto reality. Um, Even though it's not really there physically, it's there as an idea, but it's not like it hasn't gone through all of the layers of reality like atoms, molecules, living cells into becoming an apple. It is, you have like short circuited things and went just from pure light, like photons basically, which is one of the most elementary particle, and then bypassed everything and just made it out of pure light. And of course, the moment you stop feeding it light into your eyes, it disappears. But I had this thought experiment where if you look at the same augmented reality image from three different vantage points, three different observers, and triangulate that vision, then your power in seeing that apple, it's like if many people observe the same virtual object at the same spaces, because your brain, ultimately your consciousness, creates reality, it sort of gives that reality extra solidity. So it's as if you're kind of forcing that apple to appear by forcing it through all of the layers of the different networks, by convincing the atom layer that it's actually there. Because ultimately, if you watch, like if you remember in the first part of my video, ultimately everything is just energy that you're molding into taking a certain shape. And so there's no reason why the apple would not appear. Now, I'm taking the apple as a bad example because ultimately I think that we're going to start with objects that are much closer to human ideas. Like, for instance, the idea of a chair, because it's much easier to make that appear than an apple, which is an idea which doesn't manifest through the human consciousness, it manifests through trees and the whole process of growing apples on trees. So if you'd manifest an apple, probably it would be something that is rubbery, or it wouldn't taste very good, because it those things, like live things, like fruits, like animals, like all of these things, require to go through these layers, and I don't think that the human consciousness is ready to materialize them in a way which would sort of give the same result as if they were grown on trees. Which is why, by the way, in the future, nature and agriculture, responsible permaculture, and all that stuff will be so much more valued and important, because that is not something that you'll be able to manifest with your thoughts. However, you will be probably able to materialize a tablet or a car, because those things are pure human ideas which are not part of the world of biology. They do not exist in the world of biology. They do not require any kind of biological process to exist. They are a pure manifestation of a human idea. And those are the first things that will be able to materialize in that way. And I think in the first few decades, probably only people that know the whole process of creation of a certain idea will be able to use this technique to manifest that idea. What I mean by this is you would have to have these people would have to be engineers or scientists that actually know the entire process of fabrication of a tablet, know every single component, how it works, how it's assembled, and all that stuff, in order to materialize it and for in order for it to work. If you'd give it to like three kids and you'd say like, here's a virtual tablet that has been programmed, and they would probably manifest just the outer shell of the tablet with nothing inside. And as time goes by, the current factories, for instance, of how you produce things will be transformed into kind of schools where you'll go as a child, for instance, just to understand how these things are made manually so that your consciousness will have removed the blockages or limitations for you to be able to materialize the objects that are produced in those factories in reality. And obviously, this technique of creating things are going to up, just uproot so many things. Like for instance, intellectual property rights. Um, Obviously, they're going to call into question the whole way we are extracting and producing things, but not right away, obviously, because remember, um, if you have to have people observe a virtual image for it to manifest, um, sometimes machines will still be in factories much more efficient in spewing out 1,000 t-shirts a day than humans having to watch at 1,000 virtual images of t-shirts and just going through that process over and over and over again. But there will be a gradual shift towards that, and especially you'll be able to manifest things in your home in a local way. You won't have to have these gigafactories. They'll be transformed into learning schools. And gradually, as we remove those limitations, then we'll be able to just say, like, you'd be able to give an AR set to a kid, and they just be able to manifest something and just say, you know what, this is the outer shell. I'm leaving it to the universe to fill in the blank and tap into the global human consciousness. Once we reach a global consciousness, to say I leave it up to that to fill in the blanks and manifest the rest. It will also question a lot of the things about recycling and manifesting only what we need, and creating ideas like manifesting and materializing ideas in a responsible way. Because if you've watched the movie Wall-E, imagine if the technique that I'm describing is actually going to work. We could be drowned in stuff, because while it may be easy to bring in certain ideas into existence, it's not at all clear exactly how it will work the other way around. How do you demanifest an idea? And so that will also have to be a point of reflection. And right now, I'm not really quite sure how that will happen. Ultimately, of course, augmented reality and these goggles are just, like the training wheels that you put on the side of a bike, to avoid falling off. But ultimately, we'll be able to manifest things with our thoughts without having to go through this process. This is just a one potential way, I believe, that um, this process of becoming a global organism and having more control over reality and a quicker sort of manifestation of our thoughts, that's possibly one of the forms that it will take given the current technologies available. 3D printing, 3D printing, for instance, may be the step before augmented reality. So we may still have like more and more performing 3D printers, and then at some point we'll get it. We're sort of do this and be able to do it. I haven't tried it yet. I think I'll try it with my family, see if it works. Manifesting in that way. Maybe it's just that our consciousnesses are not ready for that yet, but one day they might. So this is a prediction. I'm not absolutely not sure that it will work that way. Um, so take it with a pinch of salt, as you say. Um, but I thought it would be it's an interesting sort of theory. And so again, like that's why like nature will be much more important. Like we'll take care of trees and animals and all these things much more because it'll be just so easy to manifest ideas. Um, so I hope you found this interesting. If you have any comments, questions, feel free to ask and talk to you in the next video.